My advisors, the four of us have had a very special relationship over the years. You're not just my advisors, you're my trusted business advisors. As you know, I started Snyder Manufacturing back in 1983. It took a while to get going, but by the end of this year, we'll have revenue of over $17 million. We have some secured and some unsecured debt from longstanding banking relationships, but even with that, we're very profitable. We have 60 plus employees who are some of our company's greatest assets. You know, I make a nice living. I put money aside for retirement, but as Dan said earlier, unfortunately, neither of my children have interest in the business. I'm 63 and a half, and I'm really focused on selling the company by age 65 so I can go sailing in the Caribbean. So I have a few questions for you to help me through this thought process. So for Mike and for Dan, how important are the non-financial factors in thinking about the value of this business? For instance, customer relationships, banking relationships, employee relationships. So my employees are really important to me. They'll certainly be important to an acquirer. How do I structure retention programs for key employees in order to maximize value for them and my payout at closing?
Mike, do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
Well, I guess the first thing I wanted to say is, Steve, I'm happy that you're going to be retiring down to the Caribbean, and I'm close to the phone. I can't wait for my invitation. You know, but just a couple of quick items. Non-financial factors such as a strong management team, minimal involvement by the owner in the day-to-day operations, and customer concentration issues have a lot to do with how a buyer will value your business. And the strength of your customers and employees are key value indicators for most, if not all, businesses. So I think you're heading in the right direction, and Snyder Manufacturing is a great company. Dan?
Yeah, I would add to sort of parlay, it comes down to employees, customers, vendors, and I'd say your banking relationships, especially considering you have some of your assets encumbered. Seems like you have some unsecured notes or unsecured line of credits and some secured notes. I would say bringing your banking relationships early on in the process is actually really critical. We have companies or customers that sometimes they sort of bring in the bankers, right, a little too late in the process. Even as a seller, it's important to have your bankers at the table, because they could actually be they could actually help the transaction. And maybe, Mike, you've probably seen more of this than I have. Existing banking relationships can sometimes transcend or transition with the new buyers, right? Key employees, identifying those key employees, you know, how tight is that circle? Well, that's a question that kind of gets asked quite a bit. I would say, you know, you keep your bubble a little tight, but knowing who are those key employees. And the last piece I think we also sometimes we don't think about is strategic vendors. Making sure, you know, yes, customers are very important, but sometimes, especially in manufacturing, it's really hard to service and manufacture a product without those strategic vendors behind you. So making sure that they are on board.
So as I mentioned before, I think the employees are some of our most valuable assets at the company. How do I structure a retention program now for key employees in order to maximize value for them and my payout at closing?
Maybe I can jump in for a little bit here. So a couple of things. First of all, I think going back to your customer and employee relationships and the who I should tell and bring into the fold to talk about things, I think that you have to probably see that your customer happiness is tied into at least some of your employee happiness. Certainly the folks who have you know, day-to-day or close relationships with your customers. So you want to make sure those folks are happy. And the other, their happiness can really depend on two things. First of all, they want to participate in the sale, I'm sure, and you may want to reward them for years of good service, but you also don't want them to leave immediately and join you in the Caribbean. You want them to stay and make the company continue to be valuable, because otherwise the acquirer is going to say, well, I'm not buying a company just for customer relationships without employees, because there won't be any. So really what you want to have is some sort of retention relationship, a retention arrangement for these folks that gives them a part of the deal price, but also gives them a part if they stay, maybe for a year or whatever the right time period is. And I think you need to spend some time thinking about that type of arrangements prior to bringing the key employees into the discussions of the proposed sale, because you don't want to say to them things like, I want you to help me sell this business, and they say, what's in it for me? Maybe they won't say it explicitly, and for you to have no answer. You got to have a little bit of an answer. Maybe you don't have to have a complete plan in place, but it's something that you have to deal with.
Yeah, as soon as you mention to employees, right, not everybody's built the same. As soon as you mention to an employee that you're thinking about selling the company, or that you signed a term sheet, or the lawyers are coming into the factory today with the bankers, right? You have to bring them along, but you can't bring everybody along. So I kind of think about it as two pieces. One is who are the key employees to actually getting a deal done? And two, who are the key employees that will ensure that you are successful in achieving 100% of your earnout? And if you delineate those two and structure pay for performance programs for both, I think you'll be safe with a really good, transparent communication.
I don't want to tell the employees that I'm just thinking about selling the business. When's the best time to tell them further down the road?
So I think it comes down to who actually owns the information. So an example, as soon as you sign that first term sheet or that LOI, you're going to get a due diligence list, and you're going to be pulled in 10 different directions to go out and get finances, operations, HR, customer, sales and marketing, et cetera, et cetera. You can't do it alone, Steve. Maybe you can, but at 63 and a half, you really can't. And you got to count on people. And if you begin to ask people things that are outside of sort of the normal course of business, people are pretty smart. They're going to begin to understand. So one, being open and transparent, right? Two, how it benefits them. So it's just a question of like opening up your circle as needed. And that's really going to be idiosyncratic to your situation.
I think you have to understand, we have to understand, or your advisors would have to understand the particular personalities and the roles in order to sort of advise you on which particular people should be brought in and at what level. Agreed.
And Steve,
So-
those people, those key executives that are going to be working with the buyer on due diligence and the customers and the employees and so forth, those are the key people they need to know. But my preference has always been to keep that group down to a minimum, and a manageable minimum.
So each of the three of you have mentioned due diligence in the past couple of minutes. And so Peter, let me start with you on this one. I know that the due diligence process will be challenging because we here at Snyder Manufacturing have so many contracts and agreements. I keep hearing about a due diligence data room. What is it? And when should I start thinking about creating it and organizing one?
Yeah, so the snarky answer to that is 2 years ago, but realistically, let's go back and look at how long you've been in business. You've been in business since 1983. That means a lot of your records, especially contracts, are in paper. These days, I think almost uniformly, diligence is not done using paper. It's done using online repositories, maybe at box.com or Dropbox if you're cheap and don't want to spend $10,000 for an online thing, and they're perfectly fine. We use them all the time. But the point is that you have to get the stuff organized and you have to get the stuff online. So it means you have to start scanning stuff and understanding it, which actually is not a bad thing to do even in the ordinary course of business, because as you go through, you realize, oh, wait a minute, we never signed this particular amendment, or that's strange, the pricing is different than what I thought it would be. So it's an excellent thing to do. And if you did it 2 years ago, I'm kind of joking a little bit, but if you do it over a longer time frame, it can be just an exercise in getting ready for an audit or whatever, and you can do it, as long as you keep your motivation up at a relatively leisure pace, and you're only doing it, like a couple days a week or whatever. Maybe there's less of a red flag for employees, but I think that's something that you really need to get going. And I think Dan may have mentioned, maybe the person that mentioned due diligence list, it's good to get an organized set of files. Maybe you have your files already organized in paper form. That's great. Maybe you can transition that. If not, your advisors can give you examples of how people organize these online services. And as I said, I mean, if you use something like Dropbox or Box.com or something like that, those are just two of the types of things we've used. It can be actually pretty cheap to do that sort of stuff. We're talking about $50 a month or something. Your personnel costs in organizing this are going to dwarf those sorts of things. So it's nothing to be really scared about.
Yeah, Steve, I would add one last thing to that. We're big fans of having M&A playbooks, so a due diligence playbook, where things are being memorialized, they are being captured in one file. You can transition the file. The problem that you're going to have in a manufacturing that's probably been around for 30 years is most of your stuff, like Peter said, is in paper, but it's also on-premise system. So think about your accounting system. Chances are you're probably not in the cloud. It's probably on-premise on a desktop or a local server. That makes due diligence a little bit more difficult and makes it a little bit more difficult to sort of compartmentalize who knows what.
And actually, it's a good point. I should have mentioned too, is that putting this stuff all on a box.com or something also helps in the hopefully unlikely event that there's a problem with your internal systems, either a virus or a fire or something like that. To get these things copied in electronic form is just a general good business practice anyhow.
Sounds like an important insurance policy.
Yeah,
it is.
And while we have never had a company sale before, we've done lots of transactions and they never, ever, ever finish quickly enough. And so it's from your description, it sounds like being proactive in this due diligence process very early on, meaning right now, will save us a lot of time and money as we go forward.
And I think the other thing is not only being organized, but appearing organized is crucial for building confidence in an acquirer. You go in, you say, here are all our records, and they say, what about this and this and this, and there's an answer, as opposed to, here are all our records, and they say, what about this? Oh yeah, I'll get you that too. What about this? Oh yeah, that's not complete. Okay, that can really have a bad effect. And the appearance of confidence, I joke that this was a 20 years ago experience. It was in paper where I had a company go in and have a due diligence room where the folks had already set up an actual physical room with literally 25 binders full of all the contracts that the company had done for the last 5 years. And it was like, if you're a lawyer going in there for the other side, you're saying, okay, I got it, they're organized, I'll look through this, but I don't have really any concern. So even just those appearances builds confidence.
So thanks for that information. Mike, I have one more question for you, and then we're going to jump to scenario 3. I know this business probably better than anyone, and I know the industry pretty well. I might be able to find someone to buy the company, but you're the expert. Talk to me about the process. What's the process to find the right buyer at the best value for me?
All right, Steve, here's how we'd start the process. The first thing we do is we calculate a range of value, and we would agree on a range of value. And then we identify the key value drivers in the business. Could be intellectual property, it could be customer concentration issues, the human capital, the management team, and so forth. Even favorable business culture. And we put together a group of buyer prospects that match up well with the culture at Snyder Manufacturing. We would then solicit offers from the best of these qualified buyers. And we would select the best offer and start running with that particular company. Probably, we're talking about a 3 or 4 or 5 week process right there of identifying all those buyer prospects, dwindling them down basically, and then going with the best one.
So you're talking about not identifying just one prospect, but several in order to have some competition.
Yeah, typically you might identify 5 or 10 good qualified buyers, narrow it down to 3 or 4, start with this top 3 or 4 and go from there.
Terrific.
Mike,
All right.
can I ask?
Sorry,
one-
Dan, go ahead.
Mike, would you recommend that Steve Snyder put together a pitch deck or a memorandum offering or some sort of marketing material?
Yes, definitely. I mean, we put together a profile, not a, a confidential profile basically, and then we put together a pitch deck. Typically we're talking 30, that's the marketing materials for this. So we take, it might be 30 or 40 screenshots and so forth. It's quite an effort to do that. Whether Steve would be in the right position to do that, or a banker, or the financial guys, I think it's a collaboration.
Well, I have a business to run. So Mike, this is, sounds like it's a partnership between you and me and members of the team with my other advisors.
Very much so, Steve. We work together very, very closely. Absolutely.